Thank you, my son. I'm full right now. I'll eat that part of the sandwich later. That section. The Day of Piglet. The Virtue of the Small. By Benjamin Hoff, author of The Tao of Pooh. What is a virtue? A virtue is something wonderful, like honesty. The opposite would be stealing. If you don't steal, then that is a wonderful virtue. And that's what I believe. What do you think a virtue is, son?
A virtue is a thing to do that you can do to be good.
Mm-hmm. Brushing your teeth is a good virtue. So we read about The Age of Perfect Virtue by Chuang-tse. In the age of perfect virtue, men lived among the animals and birds as members of one large family. There were no distinctions between superior and inferior to separate one man or species from another. What's a species? What's a species?
Like a life form?
That's correct. We could say the monkeys, the zebras. The monkeys are better than the zebras because they can climb trees and zebras can't. But they wouldn't compare themselves like that because I believe a zebra can run faster than a monkey. Everybody has a talent. For you, as Glenn W. Turner said, Glenn W. Turner was the founder of Dare to be Great, and great you shall be. He said, what did he say? Everybody has a talent.
Cuidado con esa miniatura.
Yes, ma'am.
Anda caminando por todos lados.
Everybody has a talent. This kitten gives us joy just by watching it and playing and doing all the things kittens do. Glenn W. Turner mentioned that you may run the fastest, or you may bake a delicious cake that nobody else can bake as well as you do. So those are your talents, virtues. There were no distinctions between superior and inferior to separate one man or species from another. All retained their natural virtue and lived in the state of pure simplicity. In the age of perfect virtue, wisdom and ability were not singled out as extraordinary. The wise were seen merely as higher branches on humanity's tree, growing a little closer to the sun. People behaved correctly without knowing that to be righteousness and propriety. They loved and respected each other without calling that benevolence. They were faithful and honest without considering that to be loyalty. Now, this was written 2,000 years ago or something?
2,000 years ago.
2,500 years ago, Chuang-tse wrote this.
This?
This part of the book that I'm reading, this section, 1, 2, 3 paragraphs.
2000 qué?
2,500 years ago.
2000. 2500
500.
años. Well, how is that possible if it's only 2014, 15?
When is the year that we count with this calendar that we're using? We're not using the Chinese calendar. We're not using the Jewish calendar. We're not using any other calendars that you know about? No? We're not using the Muslim calendar. So we're not using the Mayan calendar. We're not using the Azteca. Where are the Aztecs from?
I don't know.
Mexico. Where were the Mayas from?
I don't know.
Honduras.
Honduras. Where are the Incas from?
México.
Peru.
Perú.
Peru and
Azteca, México.
mhm,
Maya, Honduras. Incas, and Perú.
mhm. So 2,500 years ago. Well, with
Mira, México está cerca de Honduras,
mhm,
pero Perú está lejos.
mhm.
Bien lejos.
So what happened 2,000 years ago? 2,015 years ago? Anybody?
2000.
15. Hace 2015 años. ¿Qué pasó? Jesus was born. And that's the calendar that we are using all over the world. But now they used to say it's the year 2015 AD.
Después de Cristo.
Correct. And what happened 10 years before or 100 years before Jesus was born?
Antes de Cristo.
BC is before Christ. That's the way I remembered it. BC is in Latin,
Before
the
Cristo.
Roman language. I believe it's in Latin. AD is also in Latin. But I remembered these words when I was trying to
Nosotros en
understand it.
español decimos DC, después de Cristo.
Mhm.
Y AC es antes de Cristo en español.
So I say it in English, 2015 AD, after death is the way I remember it. Some people would correct me, but he raised himself from the dead, or God raised him from the dead 3 days later. So he wasn't dead. Well, okay. But his body did die. And so on. That's getting into debates. So before Jesus was born, was there a time? Just like now. Jesus' mother, Jesus' father, they were born 20 years before Jesus was born.
Look at this shape.
It's a heart pretzel. And what about Noah? And Adam and Eve? Adam and Eve were the first ones. So they didn't really use a calendar, I believe, back then. And Noah, he probably didn't use a calendar either. But, Moses. Moses was before Jesus was born too. So that's like maybe 100 years before, or 500 or 1,000 years. I don't know. When was Moses born? 1,000 years before Jesus. Now, the calendars, they use the words BCE, before the Common Era.
¿Qué es la Common Era?
That's a good question. It refers to this time.
Después de ese tan tiempo.
It's really before Jesus, or after Jesus is also the Common Era. It's just a new word, a new way of saying things. Before the Common Era. Now, one thing I never liked was when I used to see the movies at the movie theaters, they used to say 20th Century Fox or 20th Century. We are living right now in 2015, it's the 21st century. But I don't like it that way because 1972 I was born. Oh, Daniel, you were born in the 20th century. And I would say, how can I be born in the 20th century when it's 19, not 20? That's like people that say when their birthday comes up, they say, I'm 30 years old. And you're really not 30 years old until the anniversary kicks in. Let's say your birthday's in June and you say in January, oh, I'm 30 years old. No, you're really 29. You'll be 30 in June. But they say, they added already, oh, I'm 30 years old. So in the 1972, I was born, and automatically, I'm a 20th century baby. I believe that when we arrived at the year 2000, that's when we are in the 20th century. But everybody else is against me on that, so. So they were faithful and honest without considering that to be loyalty. They kept their word without thinking of good faith. In their everyday conduct, they helped and employed each other without considering duty. They did not concern themselves with justice, as there was no injustice. Living in harmony with themselves, each other, and the world, their actions left no trace, and so we have no physical record of their existence. They didn't leave bottles, empty bottles. They didn't leave trash on the floor. If they ate a mango and they dropped it on the floor, the mango was later eaten it would decompose. They didn't use these bottles and then plastic bottles and then leave them for us to find it 2,000 years later or 2,500 years later. And he's talking about before he was born, the times before, what his parents taught him, what his teachers taught him. He said people were polite with each other once upon a time, without calling it politeness. Who knows if this is true? It'd be beautiful if it was. Yes, sir. After we read another one.